going to close the door here. Okay, good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. We will get started immediately. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to this Council on Foreign Relations and Bruegel Institute workshop on securing Ukraine's future in Europe, Ukraine's defense industrial base opportunity, what opportunities exist for investing in Ukraine's defense industry. So quite a mouthful of a title. I'm Paul Stairs. I'm a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, where I also direct the Council Special Initiative on securing Ukraine's future. I think we have all been incredibly impressed with both the heroism and the resiliency of Ukraine since the full-scale invasion in 2022. No less impressive, I think, has been Ukraine's remarkable ability to constitute its defense industrial base and build this incredible suite of drones and other weapon systems, which has done so much for the survival of Ukraine, and something that we all, I think, look to as a potential model for our own defense industrial base as it grows more important in the years ahead. The purpose of this workshop is really threefold. It is to understand better what Europe can learn from the Ukrainian experience. Secondly, how Europe can continue to support the effort in Ukraine, but also what can be Ukraine's role in helping Europe rearm in the years ahead, and also what the United States can learn from Ukraine's experience and how they can also continue to support Ukraine's valiant effort, and particularly its defense industrial base. So before I turn to our guest speaker today, I just want to thank the Bruegel Institute for their partnership with us. It's been terrific working with you, Jeremy Zettelmeyer, Jacob Kierkegaard, Anastasia Zaitsver, where is she, have all been terrific, and we are very grateful. And also to my colleague Heidi Kraber-Redeker for helping put this together today. I also want to acknowledge the generous gift from the Ed and Sue Wackenheim Foundation. They provided the financial support for this workshop today, and they've also just recently given the Council a historic gift, actually $50 million for the creation of a new Center for Peace and Security, and I will be the inaugural director of that. So we're very much looking forward to further events like this and partnering with you in the future. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say to welcome you here. Let me turn to introducing our keynote speaker this morning, Katerina Michalko. She is the Director General at TechForce in UA. That is a coalition, if I've got this correct, of over 100 leading weapons manufacturers supplying the military with reconnaissance and strike UAVs, FPV drones, ground and maritime drones, electronic warfare systems, extraordinary ammunition, optics, radios, electronics. Since 2014, TechForce in UA have bolstered Ukraine's army with a range of these really cutting-edge weapon systems. So they've done a fabulous job. Before she joined TechForce, she was responsible for government relations, one of Ukraine's other leading UAV manufacturers. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Katerina to Brussels, and for being here today, and for your terrific support in ensuring Ukraine's survival. So thank you. Let me just move my stuff here.
everybody. Good morning, first of all. Thank you for having me here. It's actually it's a pleasure to be in Brussels and talk about drones, because from our perspective, from our Ukrainian perspective, drones, they are vital for the security not only of Ukraine, but actually of the European Union. We met a full-scale invasion with pretty small industry. Only 7 companies existed. And our government did not see the drones as real arms. Because, as we know, in popular culture, drones, they could deliver some food, for example, in the United States. They could film different events or parties. But it's not so common to use drones, especially different type of small drones in military operations. So when Russia fully invaded Ukraine, actually they also play a huge role in terms of military operations. And when we see like enemy targets, right now 60% of all targets of Russia, different tanks, etc., were reached by different type of drones. Again, when we are talking about drones, it could be a huge deep strike which could reach Russia territory, again with the oil station. But it also could be FPV drone, like pretty small solution, which like could look like a toy. It's pretty easy to build. Actually, many Ukrainians, they are building FPV drones in their kitchens, literally. And this was a game changer for our like battlefield, because that way a smaller country with less resources could be stable and facing the like second army in the world. But drones, they could also be a huge issue and a risk actually for civilian cities. And right now we have pretty dark time in Ukraine. I'm originally from Kyiv. I have lived there all my life. It's my hometown. And right now, like millions of people, they're sitting without heating. They're freezing in their homes. It's really cold there. It's minus 15 degrees. And Russia was successful in this type of like terror operation because they reached Ukrainian electricity stations with their drone solutions. What does it mean for Europe? The same situation could happen in any civilian city in the member states which have border with Russia. So it's Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. Technologically, nothing stops Russia from doing it. Politically as well. For them, unfortunately, it's pretty easy to strike a civilian city with hundreds of drones each night, 7 days in a row. And like drones, they don't respect borders as we see. And already we experienced like enemy drones in 10 European member states. We saw it in Belgium, like there was a case in Poland. And also France, they started like searching tanker because they suspected Russia to send drones to Denmark from this tanker. And it means, unfortunately, that we don't ready for this type of threat, because it's not economically efficient to strike drone, which pretty cheap, the drone which you could build in your kitchen, literally, with like a costly rocket, and spend millions of dollars for this rocket. Because at some point, when it could be like this huge threat, again with hundreds of drones, each night, 7 days in a row, it's impossible to hit all these drones with costly rockets. That is why we should find this solution, which could be efficient, not only technologically, but also economically, to face this type of threat, not only in Ukraine, but also, unfortunately, in the member states of the European Union. Actually, what is the biggest challenge of Ukrainian industry right now? I started my speech saying that like our industry was pretty small in 2022, but right now it's hundreds of companies which produce different type of drone solutions. Again, it's solutions in 3 domains. It's sea, land, and all type of flying drones. Again, it's dual-use drones. It's pretty small solutions, and it's like big deep strike drones which could be operated as missile. And Ukraine is lack of money and financial opportunities. It means that industry could produce few times more than other government could procure officially. And you as an arm producer, you could not sell your arms to anybody. That is why you have only one customer, and this customer is government. In Ukraine, we also raise money within society. We have different charitable foundations which could also procure arms, which is not typical for rest of the Western world, because usually charitable foundations, they do not procure arms, but in Ukraine we have this type of situation. But again, even this amount of resources is not enough to procure 100% of production capacities. On the one hand, it's issue for Ukraine because we still have a war which is going on. We should protect our countries. We have this dark situation in Kyiv, and it's literally a question of life and death. And that is why we're asking European Union of supporting actually a procurement system when we could spend EU money to procure Ukrainian solution, Ukrainian arms for the protection of Ukraine. But also it means that these production lines could be used for the security of European Union. So part of these products could be procured by different member states or by NATO agencies actually to train your military to protect your cities. Because again, it's not longer a threat only for Ukraine, but also for other member states. So when we are talking about production lines, again, it's numbers which could represent industry right now. We maximize production capacities within these few years. And another thing which is really important is to start these production lines not only inside Ukraine, but also inside member states of European Union. Because drone ecosystem is not only one piece of metal which could fly, it's actually a whole ecosystem when you should develop something, produce it. You should teach the military how to use it. You should get a feedback from the front line. You should adjust the product. And we go back to production lines, like R&D facilities, again, train military with a new solution, again, gain feedback from the front line. So it's a huge ecosystem. In Ukraine, we have this strange situation with the advantage of having frontline, because when you have frontline, you could be sure that your solution is successful and efficient because you could test it. So we are ready to share this experience with our partners, again, because Ukraine has this long-term vision of being a part of EU, and we want to be part of this family, and we want to share this experience, not to have the same situation with a drone attack within civilian cities in other countries. So actually the reality of security changed, and Europe's air defense logic was designed for a different era. Is a narrative which I mentioned before, actually, that you could not strike cheap drone with your costly rockets. This strategy won't last for the long period. That is why it's important to have counter-drone solution which could successfully protect civilian cities. Good case happened actually recently. We as Tech Force, we work not only with Ukrainian industry, but also with European companies. You have a great company in European Union called Quantum System. It's the first unicorn in dual-use technologies. The Quantum, they started a production line with Ukrainian company called Frontline Technologies. And right now they have a common production facility in Germany. It's a great example of industrial cooperation. Actually, it's the thing which is important to push and important to establish more production lines than only one. But it's a first step. And I would recommend to go into this case, to learn from this example, to advise your industry actually to do the same, to find Ukrainian partner who could really battlefield test the solution and maximize production lines in European Union. Again, to produce solutions for Ukraine and for EU, train military here to be ready for potential threat. In Tech Force, we also started this movement called Joint Venture Joint Defense to push European partners actually to cooperate with our industry. The first event was last summer in August. It's 2 days of engagement of industry. The first day is demo of capacities. We bring different member states to Lviv with the representatives from embassies and NATO agencies to showcase the Ukrainian solution. And the second day was a panel discussions about, again, joint ventures production lines. We have the idea to host the same shows with demo testing of products in Europe. The first one will be probably in Germany, maybe this summer. So the idea is, again, to integrate European Union markets inside Ukrainian experience so that we could be stronger together. From European side could be financial support, again, investments inside companies, or like opportunities to be procured by different member states. From Ukrainian side, it could be an efficient solution which truly could help to protect not only Ukraine but also European member states. Actually, we have two organizations. The first one was mentioned before. It's TechForce in UA. It's a coalition of 100 companies who produce different defense tech in Ukraine. Also, we have another organization called UXS Alliance. It's a coalition of European companies who operate in new defense industry. It means that we could not only face a threat with conventional arms, like tanks, etc., but it's also important to include new defense into our mindset. It means to use drones in these combined operations. It also means to use software actually for your awareness of this drone operation in different domains. And this type of solutions, they should be more integrated inside the military logic in the European Union. Because again, with this huge power, with Russia, who has a lot of resources, money, again, they do not value people's lives. That is why they could send a lot of people physically to the territory. But we should be like humans, and we should replace our people with the robots on the battlefield, because that way it's possible to protect democracy. Other way around, like this old school tactics, they do not work. They didn't work in Ukraine, and they won't work in the European Union either. So you could reach me on LinkedIn. So if you scan this QR code, you will find my page. If you have any questions about cooperation with Ukrainian industry or drone industry inside European Union, I would be happy to help you with two organizations, again, TechForce in Ukraine and UXS Alliance as a coalition of European companies. We, as an organization, we work in the dimension of regulatory frame with policies. We advise government how to adjust the policy for industry to be successful. And we are pretty useful for businesses and investors who want to support defense industry, invest money, to include the industry inside procurement system. So if you have any type of these questions, you could reach me or our team, and we will do our best. Thank you again for having me today.
Wondering if anybody have any questions before we start the first panel. We've got a few minutes, but maybe Katerina, if you just...
Hi, thank you. My name is Oliver Grimm. I'm with the Austrian newspaper Die Presse and the newsletter called La Matinale Européenne. You said there's $12.5 billion missing in funding for this year, right, in order to fully use the production capacity. Ukraine takes part in the SAFE program, so my question would be, is that an interesting avenue, although it's loans? Or is it rather the overall the overall financial support package that the EU is now deciding on, that, or that is actually voted on, that you would use? Or is it rather private sources of funding you would need? How do you plan to get that money? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So it's important to use the production capacities of efficient products for 100%. And to use it for 100%, actually, you need to procure 100% of these production capacities. And it's the most important part. So Ukraine, as a government, we don't have enough money to procure 100% of capacities. That is why Denmark started the program called Danish Model. It was a revolution for Ukrainian market because Denmark started procuring Ukrainian solution for our soldiers with their money. And other countries, they joined the program, and it was really useful for the industry, for supporting Ukraine directly right away. SAFE program, it's great that European Union created something to push the industry, but it's a different story because SAFE means that the country who is a member of European Union could get a loan to use this loan to actually to invest money inside production capacities inside European Union. The logic was, as I understand, actually to support Ukrainian industry as well and to gain experience from Ukraine. But it's pretty hard for Ukrainian company to join this program because we are not part of European Union yet. And Ukrainian industry is not so integrated inside this industrial base in different countries. That is why it's a tricky moment. That Ukrainian companies should be focused on the war on the one hand, on the other hand should go to other countries looking for partners to be somehow integrated into their governmental program. Truly speaking, it's really hard task for Ukrainian company to do that. That is why SAFE was not so successful for supporting Ukrainian industry. Maybe it could be successful for supporting different member states who joined the program again, but it's not about procuring Ukrainian production lines, capacities of Ukrainian production lines. It's about supporting European industry. Both things are important, but again, SAFE is not useful for solving this type of problem with extra production facilities. So the thing is that companies are looking for all things together. So first of all, they should be procured by the governmental programs or by Denmark program or somehow else inside Ukraine. Other thing is that Ukrainian companies should be integrated inside European markets to have opportunity to raise money both ways with SAFE program or with like European investors. And it's also important to push actually European investors to work in dual use technologies or defense technologies. Because I heard from my colleagues that it's pretty tricky for many investors. They're scared about military tech because war is not inside Europe. It's understandable, but maybe we should together change this logic and not to be scared into investing money in defense. So we don't have this particular strategy how to solve this problem with money. So our government looking for any resources abroad to gain it for Ukrainian industry, for Ukrainian army. But again, it's not only Ukrainian interest, it's also interest of European Union for these production lines to work for 100%. And government is opening export right now, so we could export part of the products to other countries.
Is there time for just one more question maybe? Otherwise we can get going. Just very brief.
It's just a clarification to what you just said, and thank you for being here. There is no sense, though, that Ukrainian producers are discriminated by SAFE, right? They're put at the same level as EU producers. So what you are saying is just a reflection of the fact that they are new, they may not have the same contacts, and generally that there continues to be home bias in procurement in the EU, even under SAFE. Is that the way to understand it?
Yeah, because again, on the one hand, we have the strong players in defense industry such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing Corporation, etc. They are successful companies with strong lobby in different countries, as well as Brussels and European Union. Ukrainian industry is young. It's literally startups, sometimes in garages, with pretty successful products in terms of new defense. because new defense does not really exist in other countries because you don't have a war, and we have this front line and we could test these solutions. So we have a tricky moment when we have industry without this operational capacity to lobby itself, to get this money, to understand the program fully. And on the other hand, we have resources which could be used for this new defense, but it would probably will be used for whole industry, because all industry has operational capacity to be a part of this program. So we could either way create a new program focused for this new defense industry inside Ukraine. Again, it's a tricky moment to get this money inside Ukraine, because as we see SAFE, it's actually an opportunity for companies, for Ukrainian companies as well, to be a part of this program in other member states. And export was closed from Ukraine. Ukrainian industry focused on the frontline issues, and we have a war. That is why we could not be pretty successful in these bureaucratic things. That is why we should include this fact into our policies, actually, if we want this cooperation to be like truly successful. Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Katerina. So why don't we turn to our first session today. We have a terrific panel for you to talk about how Ukraine's defense industrial base can be the arsenal of Europe. I'm going to just briefly introduce our panelists. There's more extensive bios, I think, online, and I'm going to introduce them in the order I hope we will proceed this morning. I'm going to begin first to my left to Ambassador Lena Vensild. She is Ambassador for Denmark to the EU's Political and Security Committee. She holds a degree in political science from the University of Copenhagen and has over 2 decades of experience in the Danish Foreign Ministry. She's served in many roles around the world, including in Washington, D.C. And so welcome. Then we will turn to Jacob Kierkegaard. He is a senior fellow, I think many of you know, here at Bruegel. He specializes in international economics, defense industrial policy, demographics, immigration, labor markets, and foreign direct investment. And then to my 2 colleagues, firstly, Liana Feek. She is a senior fellow for Europe in the Council of Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. She just finished a new book looking at German rearmament, written extensively on European security issues, has long experience also in various NGOs, particularly in Berlin at the Korber Foundation. And finally, Heido Krebo-Redeker. She is a senior fellow for geoeconomics at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. Long-time expert and commentator on many economic issues. She was the first economist in residence at the State Department, chief economist, to be correct, written widely on various issues of geoeconomics. Okay, so we have about 30 minutes for interaction amongst the panelists, and then we'll open it up to folks here in the room and online. So let me begin with you, Madam Ambassador. Much has been made, and we've just heard just now about the Danish model for supporting Ukraine's remarkable defense industrial base, and I think it's been emulated by other countries in Europe. Tell us just very briefly the essence of the Danish model, what we've learned from that, and maybe how it can be used going forward.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for hosting this event and for keeping Ukraine on top of the agenda and spotlighting sort of concrete solutions for how we can support Ukraine. We are approaching 4 years. And while I think we all hope that the ongoing negotiations will lead to peace, it is also very clear that the picture we see is not one of Russia relenting on the attacks of Ukraine. Quite to the contrary, we have now seen 4 months of incessant targeting of civilian infrastructure, including including energy infrastructure. And just last night we saw terrible attacks on Kiev as well. I think it was both a residential building, kindergarten and a school. So this is very much a real issue ongoing, and I think as our heads of state and government have made clear at very many occasions, this is Ukraine fighting for not only their future, but for security in Europe as a whole. So thank you very much for spotlighting this. I think it's important to recall why this issue is and should be at the top of our mind. And thank you also, Katrine, for mentioning the Danish model. I think to present it easily, or to go back to basics, it's not rocket science. Well, actually, maybe it is a little bit, but it's meant to be practical, useful, and easy to implement. We came from a position where, when the full-scale invasion happened, we tried to donate and buy as much as we could to support Ukrainian defense battle. But then we very clearly realized, early on we realized that, you know, we can't donate or buy what is necessary, but that there's untapped potential in the Ukrainian defense industry. So how do we tap this potential in a way that benefits the Ukrainian fight? So we started working on a model. The goal was clear. We had 4 aims with this model. The first and foremost aim was to increase the military support to the Ukrainian armed forces. The second aim was to increase the production capacity of the Ukrainian defense industry. Then we had a third aim, which was to ensure swift delivery of the prioritized capacities. One of the issues early on with donating material and equipment was it took time to get from where it was to the Ukrainian front line. And then we wanted to ensure that Ukraine was able to sustain and maintain the capacities that were donated. And we also aimed to target our support to capabilities that were known and used by the Ukrainians, thereby reducing the requirement for training. So in general, the aim was to provide the most cost-efficient way of supporting Ukraine. And I must say it's been quite efficient, the way we've done it. So what is it? It is a government to business model. The framework is a MOU between the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and the Danish Ministry of Defense. Ukraine is legally responsible for the acquisitions, including contracts, quality control, CSR, etc., and everything is done in accordance with Ukrainian law. Denmark then facilitates our own and increasingly also international funding through financial donations to Ukraine. In this regard, Denmark acts as an implementing actor on behalf of other countries and the European Union. Here we have used a large amount of the windfall profits from the frozen Russian assets. So all countries can provide financial support through this model, and we encourage that very much. Although I must say, this is not a competition between models. We also very much support other models that have been put forward. Again, it's not about who does what. We've gotten a lot of attention on this model. It's about what reaches the front line and what helps Ukraine in this fight. Do you want to hear how concretely it works, or should I perhaps pause?
Yes, please. And I'm particularly interested in the accountability issue, how you ensure that the money that you provide gets to the right people and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so it basically starts with a recommendation from the Ukrainian MOD about what specific weapons and companies would merit support through this model. They can either be from existing contracts or from new contracts. So my country then validates the recommendations. This includes visits to the companies and review of equipment and price levels. And then the final allocation of funds for the specific donation of projects are then made through a government decision in my country. We have implementing agreements for all projects that are signed by both the Ukrainian MOD and my country. Then when it comes to delivery and documentation, this also goes in certain steps. First, copies of invoices and contracts are forwarded to Denmark by the Ukrainian MOD. We then direct prepayments to a dedicated account. We then verify the agreed numbers and types of weapons and that they are delivered, and this includes the delivery of certificates and physical inspections on a sample basis. And then we direct the second payment. And the Ukrainian MOD confirms to have received the funds and is instructed to utilize the funds according to the IA. So we believe we have found a practical and useful model. At this point in time, I think in 2024, we delivered approximately worth of 590 million euro financed through this model, and that was from several actors, including the EU, Iceland, Sweden, and ourselves. And in 2024, the number was 1.7 billion euro, financed also by a number of countries as well as the EU. So this is how it works, and I'm happy perhaps in the next round to discuss also how we bring the Ukrainian experience home to support the development of the European defense capability. Here they have incredibly important experience to share, and I think it's absolutely necessary that we tap into this if we are to be ready in 2030.
That's a good segue to, I think, Jacob. I just want to clarify something. You said now Norway, Lithuania, Iceland, and Sweden have adopted this approach, or is
No, several countries, and I mean, I don't have a list here,
Okay.
but several countries have directed funds through this model,
I see.
not established it themselves.
I see. Okay.
Again, let's not duplicate each other's efforts. Let's build on top of each other's
I just wanted
efforts.
to clarify that. So Jacob, actually the title of this session is following this excellent report you wrote, and if you haven't read it, I really urge you to read this Bruegel Institute report of the same title. Could you sort of lay out the core argument that you essentially presenting in this, that Ukraine can be a kind of affordable arsenal as Europe undertakes its own rearmament, and that there's a kind of virtuous circle here in which we can help them, they can help us, and we can all benefit from this low-cost development model and innovation process. So could you just sort of lay that out?
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for everyone being here. I guess the starting point in that type of argument is, of course, to recognize that Europe is rearming to fight the same army, the same enemy as Ukraine is fighting today. So there is a very big overlap there. Secondly, a lot of the terrain will be quite similar. So of course it's very straightforward for Europe to absolutely have to take on as many lessons from Ukraine, the war, as possible. And now we have been through what I think in most military historians would agree is a military revolution. I've read a fair bit of history, and I don't think you can think of any instance where a new, well, not entirely new, but basically a new weapon, namely drone technology, after only a few years is accountable for, I think, Katarina mentioned 60%. I've seen figures as high as 80% of casualties. So of course, it would be utter madness for Europe not to embrace as much as it can from these experiences. And then this also follows from the fact that Europe is, as was mentioned, we are moving towards a hopefully accelerated full membership of the EU for Ukraine. So again, this would be an insane opportunity to miss. And then if you put on your quote-unquote economist hat, you basically have a country in Ukraine which have the lowest cost of wages, the lowest cost of production by a significant margin compared to anybody else in the EU. we clearly have established that it is innovation-wise at the cutting edge of modern. It is, in fact, the embodiment of modern warfare. Nobody else can do it in the way Ukraine can. So you have obviously, in a standard economic sense, if you sort of think through that, well, if Mario Draghi's idea of a fully integrated European defense market and Ukraine was a member of the EU, those issues alone would dictate that Ukraine, also in the long run, long after the war is over, would represent a disproportionately large amount of Europe's total defense production. So from that point of view, I was one who very strongly supported the reparation loan, because one of the elements in the Commission's proposal was, in the Q&A with Katarina, it was mentioned, the SAFE program was mentioned, but actually in the original reparation loan, and ultimately also how the Commission intends to implement the new 90 billion excuse me, 90 billion euro package over the next year. 60 billion of those are basically earmarked for funding procurement, military industrial production in Ukraine. So I certainly hope that this will be a pot of money that will help Ukraine reach 100% production capacity, because it simply is, I think, the best way that Europe can achieve purchasing a PPP adjusted, procurement, especially also because we are, in some ways, I guess Europe has an advantage, is that we are rearming in the midst and guided by, in fact, an ongoing military revolution in Ukraine. Normally, that would mean procurement would take place under a huge amount of uncertainty. But since we have an unfortunate, ongoing guideline for what works in the battlefield, in order for Europe to rearm and avoid buying the wrong things, we don't have a choice other than to buy what the fighting men and women of Ukraine shows us that works. And I think we could have done better from the beginning, but I would also say we are where we are, and the 90 billion from December, I think, will push us a big step in the right direction.
Just to be clear, in terms of what Ukraine's defense industrial base can offer European rearmament, is it fair to say that it's still a relatively narrow segment of the defense industry base, as well as the range of capabilities that Europe will be looking to develop in the future? Is it primarily just drones, or can we talk about other capabilities?
In my opinion, that actually depends very much on how far we think the drone revolution will go. I may take a fairly extreme view on that, but I mean, fundamentally, the drone revolution is what economists like to call capital labor substitution. One of the impetus for developing drones is, of course, the severe manpower shortage that Ukraine has always faced during this war. And that is a world which Europe is going to find itself in also going forward. So I think you will therefore find that we are going to be actively looking for replacing more and more functions, etc., on the battlefield. Katarina mentioned several pictures of sentries, ground drones, fully automated, etc. And if that's the case, which is the development I think we're going to go, and then we can have a whole debate about the effects of AI on all that. I absolutely think, or what that means to me is that you may argue that yes, today it might be a relatively narrow scope of what we conceive of being a modern army. But in the future, I don't think that's going to be the case. What we consider a modern army is what Ukraine is increasingly fielding today.
Okay. Let me turn now to my colleague Liana. Jacob's made a very persuasive argument for Europe to support, continue to support Ukraine's defense industrial base. But as you know, Liana, there are other equities in Europe, and I want to hear what Ambassador Bensild has to say about this. Other European defense industries, they also want to be part of this larger European rearmament program. Give us the perspective that Germany has, and particularly maybe some of the counter arguments to Europe, certainly relying heavily just on Ukraine. But what are the other concerns and interests that we have to take into account when we look forward to rearming Europe?
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, as always in European politics, it's not always the most compelling or the most cost-efficient argument that wins at the end of the day. And I think the German example is a good example for that, just sort of as a context. And you may all know that the German rearmament program is projected, or the German defense budget is projected to reach in 2029 162 billion euros, which is as much as the French and the British defense budget combined. So these are really proportions of scale that are unimaginable for many other European countries to reach, especially in a situation where many other countries, European countries, are fiscally constrained in a way that makes it difficult for them to take on additional debt for defense spending, as Germany has done on a large scale through ending this infamous debt break. So we are in a situation where Germany has a lot of money to spend. Other European countries are much more restricted in their defense spending. And it's also a good example, the way how Germany now allocates that defense spending, to explain exactly the constraints in Europe today, and why in the end, although Germany has some very good examples of co-production with Ukraine, for example, in Ukraine, Germany is producing Lynx fighting vehicles. So it is sort of pushing this model of co-production. But there is obviously a huge cake to be distributed, and the large part of that cake goes to German defense industries in this rearmament. There obviously there's this infamous exception in EU regulations that allows European countries to favor their own national defense industries. We already heard about the home bias, and that is unfortunately something that we do see with the case of Germany's rearmament right now, that we do fall back on a large scale into old patterns of home bias. Why is that? The reason is obviously because of the jobs. What you don't produce in your own country, what you produce in Ukraine, creates jobs in Ukraine, which may be more cost efficient. But at a time when many European countries, but Germany, for example, in particular, is struggling with economic stagnation for years, where the China challenge that is coming and hitting especially Germany very hard, the solution that policymakers look to is creating jobs in the defense industry. In the German example, living in Stuttgart and working at BMW has been for many decades the model of, well, you have achieved something in life, right? This is a safe job, this is a well-paying job. That is going to be in the future, that is going to be a job with German defense industry. And the argument from German policymakers' side is, of course, there's going to be co-production with Ukraine, the argument is the cake is big enough for everyone to get something of that, but the direction of travel that we see is unfortunately partnerships, but not necessarily a real strong push towards a greater coherence of the European defense market. That does not seem to be the priority from the perspective of Germany's defense spending, but really to create those jobs that will be missing in the future, especially sort of from the automotive industry. That is the biggest constraint. Let me add two more, just sort of to round out the picture. There's certainly more. The other constraint is that something that I would say will disappear, or not completely disappear, but become weaker in the future. is obviously the need to procure from the United States, which some argue is still something that needs to be done to keep the transatlantic alliance alive. Certainly the Greenland shock has weakened that argument, and I believe will further weaken it in the future. The French position on buying European has become much more prominent there. And then, of course, we have the challenge of EU's institutional integration into the EU. The models that are being floated now about Ukraine becoming, or others becoming a member of the European Union without voting rights, already show how much concern there is about what a full integration of Ukraine into the European Union will mean. These are all things that sort of are not unsurmountable, but I do think they will limit the scope of the scope of what Jacob proposed in his paper. I believe there will be a lot of reliance on Ukraine. There will be a lot of co-production with Ukraine, but making Ukraine the arsenal for cost-efficient productions of most of what sort of Europe needs, especially in new defense, I think will be a challenge, given that it needs to be balanced with domestic and European constraints on that level. So I expect the scope to be smaller, but certainly the direction of travel continues to be the right direction.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to come back to explore this a little more extensively. Heidi, let me turn to you now. You know, you've been looking at what the Ukrainians have been doing very closely, and with all the attractions of this very sort of cheap, rapid turnaround, very quick innovation, adoption, adaptation, deployment, and so it's remarkable the speed that developments take place. What can the US learn from this? Particularly, you know, many US defense companies are not renowned for the speed at which they innovate and develop and deploy. It takes much longer. So what is the debate in the US now about how the US can adopt the Ukraine model, make the most of it, and I'd be interested also in terms of continuing US support for what Ukraine's doing. So maybe sort of two parts to the question.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks again to Bruegel for co-hosting this with the Council on Foreign Relations. So I would start where Jacob was on just the scale of the revolution that we're talking about in warfare, and it's not just Jacob who's noted this. It's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, in the United States, said that what's happened in drone development and autonomy and weapon systems in Ukraine is the most significant fundamental change to the character of war ever recorded in history. So I think we need to think about that. We've had very close ties with our Defense Department and other NATO allied defense departments and ministries for many years now. The funding coming from the United States, it was sort of the number that's generally used is about $175 billion over 5 congressional funding rounds during the Biden administration. I don't think that was actually sustainable, and so several years ago, when I started looking at the evolution of what ended up, at the very beginning, we were talking about these artisanal, drone made in kitchens and garages, sort of friends and family were funding, crowdsourcing of funds to actually fund these amazing, innovative ways to actually push back against one of the world's largest armies. The naval drone operations that were sort of patchwork together to actually chase back and push back the Black Sea Russian fleet was truly astounding. I think the opportunity and the way that we need to think about Ukraine and Ukrainian companies is really they are frontier tech, miltech companies. It's very different. It's different in terms of how you need to fund these companies. You need different business models. I think the Danish model is I think it's fantastic. But I also think that this is where I've had a lot of conversations with venture capital companies about the fact that the Ukraine and Ukrainian companies have moved from these hundreds of artisanal companies to sort of a business that was 2022, 2023. You started to see business formation. You started to see interest in seed capital going into these businesses that were sort of wildly innovative. A lot of the Silicon Valley defense tech industry, they test their weapons in Ukraine. They go there because if you can't operate on the battlefield in Ukraine, then you can't operate anywhere in modern day warfare. And so slowly, I would say slowly in terms of how many lives have been lost on the battlefield already, but we've seen a 100-fold increase in venture capital money just from 2023 to 2025 going into Ukrainian defense startups. And so I think when we think about why maybe a loan-based program won't necessarily work for Ukrainian companies, it's really almost an equity. It's the procurement coming from the Ukrainian government, from European governments, that the argument really needs to be you're looking at a different beast. It's a bottom-up approach. It's not a centrally, government-mandated Russian-style approach to how the Ukrainians have actually pulled off this revolution and warfare. So I would caution everybody in how they think about Ukrainian military companies. They need to be thinking about innovation in a startup sort of Series A, B, C mode, and look at it as an investment opportunity. So I'm actually very excited about the opportunity for investment. When I talk to my European economic and commercial counterparts, they are always bemoaning that the U.S. is always at the leading edge of innovation, that they're always, Europe is always behind, and how can it ever catch up? And I point to Ukraine, and I say, you have in Europe the most innovative defense tech sector on the planet. So you should be taking advantage of that for, for your own innovation, for your learning, because these are dual-use technologies. So at the end of this, and this is where I'll lead to for the argument for Europe, is that there will be another side of this, and you will have a Ukrainian economy that is going to need to have jobs, both for the amazing innovators and the technology wizards who are still not in Ukraine but need to come home and should come home, and then for all of the diaspora that you have of Ukrainians in Europe right now who would like to go home at some point but need jobs. So think about this not only as a defense industrial base opportunity for Ukraine itself and for Europe, but to be able to actually have an anchor for an economy in Ukraine at the end of this as it comes into the European Union is going to be a stabilizing factor, and one that I think will play both to Ukraine's benefit and to Europe's benefit. It's such a great opportunity that I think I wish the U.S. would from the government side see it as much of an opportunity as the Silicon Valley investors that I talk to think about it.
Yeah, just to be clear, most of you think the future support to Ukraine will come from the private sector rather than from direct.
So I think it has to come for certain types of legacy systems, the intelligence and sort of the larger defense systems. You need to have the United States and European partners provide that. But in terms of the future of warfare, I'm very much where Jacob is, that this is where it's going. Ukraine is at the forefront. But these are also small to medium-sized companies. I think, for example, and this might be controversial in Europe, but I think the European Investment Bank has a much bigger role that they could play in this space. They have a mandate for the EU accession. They have a mandate to actually help small and medium-sized businesses in Europe in that process. They have the ability now to invest in dual use, which are drones. And so the part of EIB's mission should be much more focused on, they have a 500+ billion euro balance sheet. They should be much more focused on how they can support SMEs, meaning the drone industry, and all of the related parts of that industry, because it's not just drones, in Ukraine, and it would be a powerful mechanism to actually supercharge the ability of Ukraine to actually develop this industry.
Okay, terrific. So we're going to open it up now to both folks here in the room as well as those online. And as we always do in Washington, just raise your hand, and I try to call you out in the order I see them, and there will be a microphone available. So I welcome folks here in the room and online to ask any questions. Silence? Yes, over here on the left. Thank you.
I would like to ask Katerina, what is the probable increase in the numbers and how soon could be done production of drones after receiving sufficient funding for that, like 6 months?
Thank you. Maybe I will answer deeper during my panel because I will have a chance in the future. The short answer is actually it depends on the type of drone, because to produce one type of drone, for example, deep strike, which is pretty big one and like technologically not so like simple as FPV drone. For the deep strike, you need to spend like from 4 months up to 8 months. It's a production circle. If we are talking about FPV drones, or one FPV drone could be built within a few hours, actually. So it depends on circle. It actually depends on the procurement of components. We miss the part about components, but actually Ukraine is still relying on Chinese components, unfortunately. And it is a space for cooperation with European industry, actually to integrate the components from European Union inside Ukrainian products for political reasons, and also to make these production lines faster. Because Europe is like, it's pretty close to Ukraine. To wait for like Asian components, you need to spend more time like technically. And could I ask a question to panelists?
Please do.
Yeah, actually Ukraine is so grateful to Denmark for Danish model. And right now we are seeing different like challenging situation with the security in your country. What would Denmark expect from Ukraine in terms of technological cooperation? How to be a good partner from Ukrainian side, because Ukraine is really grateful for whole support which we received. So from your perspective, what would be the like perfect scenario? What should Ukraine do to support our partners? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, I think actually, and it's quite remarkable, you're fighting a war against a brutal aggressor, and you're already a good partner. And have been throughout the war. You've been willing to share your experiences, hard-won experiences from the battlefield, and both our companies and our defenses and our institutions and organizations have close contact, the way that friends and partners do. So I think there's already a lot of good cooperation ongoing. That will help not only my country but all of Europe and anybody who wants to engage in the increased security threats we see and the increased uncertainty we see in the world today. So thank you for your partnership, and thank you for the Ukrainian willingness to share with partners and allies around the world.
Okay, I think there's gentleman at the back there. And please, those online, just type in your question and we will try to get to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy Zettelmeier, the director of Bruegel. So I guess my question is on how to think about, focus programs like the Danish one in relation to simply giving money to Ukraine to procure its own weapons. From wherever it needs. So, as Jacob said, about 2/3 of the loan that was mobilized is actually to loosen essentially the financial constraint holding back procurement by the Ukrainian military. So how should I think about the value added of a facility like the one that Denmark has put in? Is it about, you know, a channel of mobilizing excess funding in some sense beyond that, what countries in the EU would normally be willing to give, because this is linked to, in effect, greater control over what is funded? Or should I think of this as, you know, some channel for transmitting maybe know-how, or is it a form of, you know, funding combined with technical cooperation? So I mean, it's not completely obvious to me why those programs are better than simply just giving Ukraine money to buy its own goods.
Any takers on that? Jacob, maybe?
I mean, I think there's always going to be a struggle between Ukraine, that naturally wants as much freedom in what it procures, and the EU, where, you know, different member states have very different levels of, you know, steering, the steering nature, or the Colbertist spirit of individual EU member state governments is quite different in its intensity. But, you know, I think it could actually go both ways in some ways. I think, as I said, I would certainly, because Europe is rearming because of the rapid technological development on the battlefield, as I said before, I think it is in Europe's interest to not necessarily hand the steering wheel entirely to Ukraine to decide how to spend the money, but nonetheless, because part of this funding is also in money given in order to maximize Ukraine's ability of victory. So, you know, I therefore clearly fall on the spectrum that this ideally should the 60 billion envelope of the new package should ideally function somewhat similar to what the Danish model has done. It shouldn't be exclusively that, but certainly that could be a very big component of it. And I think it would be, on the other hand, quite tragic what we have seen in the news, I think yesterday, where it was reported that you know, the French government was opposed to that Ukraine used EU funds to procure Storm Shadow missiles, right? Because it was not a weapon made in the EU. You know, those are the kinds of things that we absolutely must avoid. And I think the Danish, or something looking like that, helps us avoid that.
Okay, anything you wanted to add, Lena? Okay, so there's a gentleman over here on the left, and then we will go to a question from online.
Thank you. I've got a question for the panel at large.
Could you just say who you are?
Yes, I'm Alexander de Vos van Steenbeek of the Athena Defense Fund. The EU does not have a defense industrial policy. That means that all the inefficiencies that comes from the nationalistic bias of the construction of the defense industry manifest themselves. Some anecdotal evidence suggests that everything that is produced in the EU is 30% too expensive. If you imagine a collective defense budget of the EU plus the UK plus Norway plus moving to close to $1 trillion a year, 30% inefficiency, which is procured from inevitably social programs and further debt increases, is no longer trivial. Other anecdotal example, from all the spending, this is from the Kiel Institute, all the spending of Germany, recent spending the last 2 years on defense, 50% was spent in Germany and 50% outside the EU. Now, what is your level of what is your assessment, what's your optimism, pessimism, that there'll be a real European defense policy, an industrial policy that will radically simplify and limit the number of different platforms? We use close to 200 platforms of the main weapon systems, the US around 30, that we radically simplify, and that we build scale in industries, which is the key to bringing costs down. Thank you.
Okay, who would like to, I know Jacob, but maybe Leanna first, Jacob, and Ambassador, if you want to say something about that too. It's a great question, thank you.
Yeah, and I think the question becomes even more urgent if you look at what is earmarked in Germany's defense spending until 2029, where you clearly see that there is a very strong German home bias that continues to be there. And if there were one country that should sort of lead the charge for a Europeanization of the defense industrial base, it is certainly Germany, which will be or already is the fourth largest defense spender in the world after the United States, China, and Russia. And actually, the defense budget in 2029, in its projection, will be as much as CIPRI estimates Russia spends today. So it's a very close call between Germany and Russia there. My assumption is that the external shocks that Europe has received so far, and those were basically 2 times an invasion of Ukraine and 2 times an election of Donald Trump in the last 10 years, have been sufficient to overcome some of the problems of security and defense in Europe, but have not been sufficient enough to overcome that problem. And I don't think that the European political system, with all the domestic constraints that we see right now, has it in it to take this revolutionary approach that to just prioritize a European defense industrial base. I think you will need an outside shock for that to happen, and that outside shock is either a shock coming from the United States, a sudden shock, dramatic adaptation of force posture, or obviously a shock that Russia moves out of the gray zone activities, or dark gray zone activities, as I would call them in Europe right now, towards actual low-scale or middle-scale attacks on Europe. I think that is something that needs a bigger shock than what we had right now to overcome these constraints in the defense industry.
Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, I think I broadly have a more optimistic view than the question expresses, because I think, I'm not sure, for instance, that common procurement is really that important for, cost. If that was true, then the United States would have the cheapest planes, the cheapest everything, and they don't. And on the consolidation of weapon systems, as I said, it's very difficult to consolidate when the technological innovation is as rapid as it is. We simply don't know what the end game will be. But on the other hand, as Leanna said, look, Germany is the only large EU member that is significantly expanding its permanent standing army. That also means that Germany itself accounts for a very, very large share of the entire quote-unquote European rearmament, which really is, at the end of the day, northeastern European rearmament. So what does that mean? It means that if you're going to have any kind of scale, any kind of consolidation, it's going to come through what Germany decides to do. And I think if you're looking at what is going on just the classical things, we used to joke that we had so many tanks and so many armored personnel vehicles. I don't think there's any doubt that the dominant tank in Europe is going to be the German Leopard. I don't think that there's any doubt, and if you look at procurements in the rearming countries, for instance, for infantry fighting vehicles, it's going to be the Lynx, it's going to be the CV-90. For other types of armored personnel carriers, it's going to be the Boxer, the CAVS system, etc. So it's not one for all of Europe, but it's certainly a lot better than what it was just even during the Cold War, by the way. So I think that this is inevitable, because what we have seen, and I think Liana alluded to that, is that the Ukraine war is the first shock that the EU has also suffered since at least the Euro crisis, where you have not seen more political integration, etc. We have not seen a large scale common funding of common defense programs, tasks. It could be, the air shield. We can think of many, many things. What we have decided to do, fortunately, is, of course, to fund Ukraine as a common project. And that in itself will be very determined in answering your question, because again, whatever the long-term size of the standing army in Ukraine will be, it will certainly be one of the, if not the largest in Europe. And therefore that itself will be providing some of the scale. So who's expanding the army? It's really Germany, to some extent Poland and Ukraine.
So just to jump in and link what Liana said about the shock to the system, as the sole American sitting on this panel, I will say if Greenland was not a shock enough, and this is not an issue that's going away anytime soon, I don't know what other wake-up call you would need. This is a very bad time for Europe to have a highly fragmented capital markets and a highly fragmented defense industrial base. I agree that I am optimistic because of what happened in mobilizing the funds for Ukraine after the use of the Russian frozen assets structure did not work, and that is the consolidated funding mechanism used to raise common debt to actually fund the support for Ukraine. I think that's a model that should be built on, and it's something that the EU has been struggling with for many, 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 many years. And so I do think that is, while you don't need to have every single sovereign within the European Union have its own major defense player, you do need a consolidated funding instrument in the Eurozone to actually fund the kind of scale that you're going to need and need soon.
Lena, just.
Thank you. And the trend is clear, and Europe needs to do more on its own, and that has been clear for a long time. You point to some of the impediments and challenges, very rightly so. I agree to a large extent with the analysis that we're too fragmented, that we don't get enough of our money's worth when it comes to defense. So that much is clear, and I'll be sort of the diplomat, sort of the middle ground between the different points of view on the panel. I think we need to work on the one hand side for European solutions, and I would love an internal market for defense industry. I think there's a lot of barriers that need to be torn down, and a lot of projects we need to do together. And that also gives me an opportunity to highlight the Danish presidency for the last 6 months, where we closed the EDIP, and we also made a lot of progress on the omnibus. We have 2 omnibuses, one on regulation, one on financing. And we moved a lot forward also on integrating Ukraine in all the European instruments. So we have to continue, and here I hope that our heads of state and government will keep on pushing for European cooperation and joint procurement. But we cannot let ourselves stop by this being difficult and not happening tomorrow. We have to continue with concrete solutions. And for instance, my country has had a lot of benefit in coordinating and cooperating with the other Nordic countries. So while it might be tempting to dream of a big solution and for us becoming as tied up as other actors, I think we also have to realize we are a number of sovereign independent countries, and we have to make work how we can, as long as we continue to push forward and focus on and prioritize our defense industry buildup.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes or so left. We've got 2 questions from online, one from Beta. What can we learn from Ukraine as regards ensuring different technologies, homegrown, including those provided by Europe, work together seamlessly? And from Mitchell, based on Ukraine's experience, what policy tools best support defense startups, funding, regulation, procurement, and collaboration? And how can the EU governments apply these to strengthen Europe's defense innovation ecosystem? We've, I think, touched a little bit on the latter one, particularly the Danish model, but please offer your response to the question that most attracts you. Jacob.
I mean, I think to Beata's question, that's the future role of NATO. If NATO is going to have any meaningful future, it is to ensure the interoperability, the common training standards, etc., of forces in Europe, the United States, and Ukraine. And that for NATO, I think, given that whatever we think of the current Secretary General, we are in a world where, excuse me, the traditional foundation of NATO, namely Article 5 and the US provision of security for the other members, is no longer credible. And as Europe, with, in my opinion, Ukraine as the foundation, builds an independent military deterrent of Russia, it's no longer necessary. But that doesn't mean that NATO itself is obsolete, because it has precisely the role that Beata outlines. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Heidi?
Just on the second question that Mitchell had, the second question, and I think it was Mitchell. Yes. What experience and policy tools to support defense startups, funding, regulation, procurement, and collaboration. First of all, Ukraine has incredible reach into the VC world, and so there's a lot of very current feedback. Brave One, which is a partner in Ukraine for a lot of defense startups, and a lot of the innovation ecosystems there. They work together with the Defense Innovation Unit, which is part of the Department of Defense that is in Silicon Valley, that works with a lot of defense startups in the US. What I hear from all of those voices is that you have a rapidly, these startups are not startups anymore. They need help with like a Y Combinator, mentorship. How do you put the CFO in place? How do you have accounting in place when they're fighting a war? And so there are a lot of ways to support Ukrainian small and medium-sized enterprises that are growing rapidly, that are going to, in Silicon Valley, there are going to be a lot of unicorns coming out of Ukraine. And so the enthusiasm to actually invest is there. The ecosystem to actually build companies is what still needs help right now. And I think there's a lot that the EU can do to support that. And I go back to EIB and sort of like small business creation and all of that, that construction of businesses that can support these companies that are literally like fighting for their lives.
Great. Okay. Anybody else? Liana? Oh.
On to the first question. I do think it might also in the future become increasingly a role for the EU to think about interoperability, obviously not different from NATO standards, adopting NATO standards, not only because, as you said, Jacob, the future of NATO is in question in some ways, but also because, linking to what Heidi before said, if the way for Europe to have a better integrated defense industry at some point will be European joint debt for funding a defense industry, then obviously European joint debt will not just go to capitals, but need some mechanism on the European level, what is procured, how it is procured. And there comes a role for EU institutions. Right now, many member states prefer the European Defense Agency over the European Commission in having a role there. But I do believe that if the EU becomes the financing machine behind Europe's rearmament, and especially if sooner or later European defense bonds are unavoidable to go down that path, then the EU will also have a greater role in what is procured and to make sure that it's interoperable.
Okay, well, we are sadly out of time. This has been a terrific discussion. Thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you for those in the audience who asked questions and online. One question that I hope we can get at some point this morning is what happens when peace comes to Ukraine and how things change as a result of that, and how we adapt and continue to support Ukraine and take advantage of its remarkable populace and technical prowess. So with that, I invite you to thank the panelists today, and there will be a 30-minute coffee break, I believe, outside, and then we will reconvene again at 11 a.m. This morning, so in 30 minutes. So please join me in thanking the panelists.
Okay, welcome back to panel 2, which is going to be as good or even better than panel 1 of our event on Ukraine and its defense sector. So I'm Jeremy Zettelmeier, I'm the director of Bruegel. It's my great pleasure to moderate this panel. I'm so happy they're all here. Elena got a little sick, and she still braved it, because that's the spirit we need. Let me just quickly introduce. Immediately to my left is Sinikka Parviainen, who is a senior economic analyst and particularly an expert on the Russian and Ukrainian economies at the Bank of Finland Institute for Emerging Economies. BOFIT. The T used to come from transition. Okay, they kept the acronym, but they changed the title. So it's Europe's foremost center of expertise for Eastern Europe and beyond, I would say. Then we have Katarina Milchalko, who you have also already met, of course, who's the Director General of the Tech Force in UA, which is basically a coalition of weapons manufacturers, about 50, right? Sort of young tech companies in Ukraine, in sectors like drones, electronic warfare system, ammunitions, and so forth. So the new stuff that we need for Europe. We have then, I guess you guys should be switching, by the way. I'm going to take you last. Switch seats. Oh, you're doing it for health reasons? Oh, no? Okay, fine. Then switch. Yeah. Okay, then we have Elena Rybakova, who is our very own expert on the Russian and Ukrainian economies here at Bruegel, and she's also, of course, affiliated with the Kiev School of Economics and with the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C., and is perhaps best known for her really super important and interesting work on sanctions and their effects. And finally, we have Lukasz Wesely, who's deputy head of the unit for Ukraine's reconstruction and accession at the Director General for Enlargement and the Eastern Neighborhood of the European Commission. So we have a whole bunch of perspectives here. Now, let me just say how I see this panel compared to the first. So the first panel was mostly about why the Ukrainian defense sector is important for Europe, and to some extent what Europe can do to help it in its own interest, right? Now, the focus of this panel, it will, there's going to be a little bit of an overlap, but hopefully not too much, is going to be just squarely on Ukraine itself. It will be, why developing the defense sector is good for Ukraine, not just in making it win the war, but also in a broader sense. And what policies can support it. And of course, these policies should now very explicitly include policies in Ukraine itself, not just what Europe can do. So I view this in a sense as an industrial policy panel, very broadly defined. But again, the Commission, the EU, may have its own role, and this is why we have Lukasz here. So let me start with a question for Sinikka, which is essentially about the motivation. So basically, so far what we have heard is, Europe needs Ukraine both to fight the Russians and to be the armament arsenal of Europe to help us deter the Russians. But what about its own interest beyond perhaps the immediate military component? So is this sort of spur and growth of the Ukrainian military sector in Ukraine's best interest, maybe taking a longer term perspective beyond the war itself? Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Mic on. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, and you're probably wondering about the graph, and I promise I have this one. And regarding your question, as you see in the graph, Ukraine's production, I think it was something Katarina already said, but this is the same in graph form, that Ukraine's military production has doubled. The capacity has probably more than tripled during this full-scale war. But at the same time, if you look at the lowest line there, this kind of green-blue graph here, you see that the rest of the manufacturing sector has not really been recovering. So we see that the military industries are actually you could say the only thing driving Ukraine's manufacturing at the moment. It's quite understandable, like steel industries. They used to be kind of Ukraine's champion in exports. They are devastated. Ukraine's other industries, extractive industries, are also many important production areas are lost. So this will be, or I think it's safe to assume that this structural change will persist for Ukraine's economy also when the fighting stops. And the longer this war lasts now, this structural change will consolidate even further. So I think it's safe to kind of make a bet on these industries. That's my motivation here. And Ukraine, I think maybe Katarina, you can disagree or agree. Ukraine had a fairly strong ICT sector already before the war. Many European companies, I know Finnish companies, had outsourced their IT services in Kiev as well. So I think this basis and probably also the strong knowledge of mathematics that was persistent in Ukraine was one of the kind of foundations of this like building a huge military industrial base. Of course, there's the necessity that was the biggest driver, but these are one of the foundations. So this graph was just to bring you a kind of where we are at the moment, and I think it might tell you where we're going to be when the fighting stops and recovery starts.
So just to clarify, you're not making the point that there is in effect crowding out in Ukraine by this splurge in military production that reflects supply constraints, because that of course would then reflect on the strategy, on how what to do about promoting further scaling and maybe industrial development. I mean, the graph itself simply shows what you would, I think, expect to see in an economy that's fighting a war, is specialization. So I guess the lines are the weapon, it's not very clear. The weapons and ammunition is the top one, military fighting vehicles is the middle one, and then the rest of manufacturing is the low one. So this is just specialization, but can we learn something beyond that from the graph, right? So the point, for example, is being made that there is excess capacity in the Ukrainian military sector. Is that contradicted by how you interpret the chart or not?
No, I don't think it is. The only thing you mentioned, crowding out, I think one issue is labor. There might be some crowding out of, or that these military industrial sectors, they are receiving preferential funding in some point, and because they are the only kind of the only manufacturing industry that is very, very prominent and receiving like foreign help as well. So I think there might be this. It's becoming very attractive for in the Ukrainian context for highly skilled professionals. One issue that has been raised when I talk to my Ukrainian colleagues is the level of education going forward. If we're talking about let's say the post-war period, education in this kind of type of engineering, I think it could prove out to be a bottleneck in Ukraine. So there could be this crowding out from other sectors as well that will require, let's say, civilian sectors that will require. Labor force issue is huge in Ukraine, and that will intensify when the recovery starts.
Thank you. Katerina, so you represent the perspective of this new Ukrainian defense sector. So I think it is to be expected that when you come to Brussels and speak to this audience, your main emphasis is going to be on, essentially procurement from outside Ukraine, loosening financial constraints within Ukraine so that Ukraine can procure more. But what is it that you tell Ukrainian policymakers at an analogous event in Kiev? I mean, presumably there's an agenda for them as well. What would be on that agenda?
Yeah, actually, Tech Force is well known for our export campaign, because when the full-scale invasion started, the government, for understandable reason, stopped the export from Ukraine. Ukrainian industry used to be so governmental. In Ukraine, we have production lines which are owned by the government, and they produce mostly conventional solutions, and they were also exporting different type of services to other countries, and that is why the government actually stopped this international cooperation. It influenced the Ukrainian market because we have this issue with budget, and the industry could produce few times more than the government could procure. And when the international market was closed, it meant for the industry actually that you are stuck in the situation. So your own government could not procure 100% of your production capacities. You could not export.
When did that happen? When did they put in export controls effectively, or export barriers? When did they do this?
It
Roughly.
Was 2022.
I see. At the beginning of the war.
So we don't have a law which says that you could not export, but technically it just didn't work for years. And right now it seems like Ukraine opens export. The President Zelensky made a speech in UN saying that Ukraine wants to share experience with European Union. It's a great move. I mean, the issue about international cooperation was on our side, and I'm glad that we fixed the thing. And right now, international cooperation, it exists at least. The second point is actually predictability, because in EU, in the United States, you procure arms for years. So your companies, your industry understands how to actually calculate your production lines and how to predict the size of the different arms which you need to produce. In Ukraine, it's impossible because we procure within few months. And somebody could say that we procure within few months because technology is dynamic on the front lines. That is why you need to adapt fast. That is also true. But for this matter, you could create flexible deals with the companies to adapt actually technology after you paid for the production line to be operated. Because otherwise, when your company, private one, only could predict their production activities for a few months, it's really hard to operate inside this business. So Ukraine, our policymakers, we should learn from Europe and US how actually to build a predictable system. But it's only possible to build a predictable system if you have a budget to procure. Because when you sign some kind of deal without money, it makes no sense because the issue actually is the same. So our message to government, to sum up, it's actually two things. First of all, open international cooperation in order to make Ukraine stronger and EU stronger. Second point is to make governmental deals predictable for companies to plan their activities. This predictability actually could be provided also from EU, because when EU provides funding, it's easier for our government to provide this predictability to our market. And the third issue, but not last, but not the least, it's actually the localization of components inside Ukraine or EU. Because of this issue with the governmental budget, Ukrainian industry is procuring components from China because it's cheaper. And our government should procure these arms because we need to supply drones to the front line. Otherwise, we will lose the war. And in this dimension, EU could play its role, because if your industry will provide Ukrainian companies components, it could be both politically and financially a good case for European Union to integrate your components base inside Ukrainian products. We as a country or we as an industry, we could not procure European components because of the price. But it could be a part of international support program. And I haven't seen such ideas or programs yet, so maybe we should establish something like that together.
Thanks. If you can maybe, I guess it's implicit what you said, but if you can maybe just summarize how you would answer the argument, which I'm sure was behind the initial export restrictions, that the arms industry in Ukraine should not export because every piece of equipment is needed for the Ukrainian front. And if it exports, if it opens up completely, all that will happen is that prices are bid up by the export demand of the much richer EU countries. So it's a little bit like, tourists bidding up rent shares in cities. And so, governments everywhere in the world tend to want to intervene to, keep prices down for their own purposes, whether this is for local residents or to make procurement cheaper. So this will have arguably a cost effect. I'm not advocating this, but I'm just saying how do you deal? It's a very Soviet way of thinking that we want to keep the goods in the country so that we can use them ourselves, right? So I went, my first mission when I was at the IMF was to Tajikistan, where we told them, no, exporting is actually a good thing. It's not like, water flowing over the border where you can only export after you have satisfied all the domestic needs. I mean, fundamentally, it's the same logic, but it's a hard logic to dispel. So just tell me how you dispel the logic.
Yeah, for our army to have drones or arms on the front line, these arms or drones should be procured by somebody. If nobody procured it, it could not like be sent to the front line. So the question is like where to find the money. So when the government just limited the export, it was a questionable strategy from industry perspective, because the government could not procure, the producer could not sell it abroad. So what's to do? It's actually to short your production line, and it's not a great scenario, nor for Ukraine, neither for European Union, because again, Ukraine also wants to be a partner for European Union. So even though we could not procure these things for ourselves, it's better to provide this chance to procure for EU member states, again, for their own need or maybe for the need of Ukrainian army. Another important actually dimension, it's about technological cooperation, because export of arms, it's not only about piece of metal which you send somewhere, it's also about technology which you could like export to some member state to start production lines. So the fact that export was closed means that a company could not export technology as well. And it means that you could not start a joint venture inside EU. And it also limited resources which this company could gain through investments and this type of international cooperation. So I guess Ukraine should have a wide list of partners who are pretty like safe for this type of cooperation, because the most like strong argument not to start export, from my perspective, is actually safety reasons, not to lose technology, not to not provide a chance to Russians to get this technology somehow. So we should have this like wide list of like partners who are successful into like protecting Ukraine rights and values. And it's important to like learn Russian experience, because I've been to Abu Dhabi last week. Abu Dhabi hosted a big expo of drones, and like Russia, they produce drones inside their governmental companies, and their booth on that expo was like huge. They're selling these solutions to Middle East. They're making money through killing Ukrainian people. Let's call the things like directly. So they kill Ukrainian people, they gain experience, they're making money in Middle East, and they could become a richer country and gain more resources to go on with this war. And it's also a risk. So maybe Ukraine plus EU should be an opponent to Russian industry in the markets which are like in the gray zone, so that Russia will make less money through this international partnership within selling like experience from Ukraine. Because only two countries in the world, they currently get this experience from the front line. It's Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, so you went to like a trade fair in Abu Dhabi where there was like a little Russian stand or several Russian stands peddling their drones, and then there were Ukrainian stands there as well with drones?
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's a reality which we exist in. So when I travel to EU, it's a pleasure to see Ukrainian flags. It's a pleasure to be supported by EU partners, but the world is big, and in some regions, yeah, Russia, they export their solutions, they're making money through it. They're actually saying that we battlefield tested in Ukraine and it was successful, and that is why other countries, they are procuring it. Yeah. And it's our common like task to beat Russia in international markets.
Okay, thank you so much. So, Alina, Katarina, I think, has given us a huge amount of food for thought. So I don't even know where to begin asking you about it. So just comment on some things that she said. But I guess I'm looking for maybe three things. One is, to what extent has the Ukrainian government understood now that restricting arms exports is not a good idea? So are these restrictions really gone at this point, or is this something they still need to work on? Then, your broad sense on where are the binding constraints, effectively, in developing the Ukrainian arms sector, which I think, after what Sinika said, we can safely assume that this is good for the Ukrainian economy, even beyond the war. And to what extent are these, supply constraints versus demand? And then finally, there's this fascinating thing that, Russia, obviously supports its arms, its war effort mainly by exporting fossil fuels. But apparently they're now also supporting it by exporting their arms, which is kind of ironic. And so as a sanctions expert, anything we could do about that? Preventing them from doing that? Like telling Abu Dhabi not to have a stand for Russian drones on their trade fairs? Go ahead.
Well, I'll go in the order that you suggested, and I was also thinking after Katerina, it's hard to add. But first on the export controls, sort of from Ukraine, it's an old law. I think it's from early 2000s, which is not an explicit prevention of exports. It's just a series of impossible hoops that the companies have to jump through, and most companies cannot jump through. So I would also add an argument to Katerina's is that then you end up having government choosing winners, or somebody somewhere in the government choosing a winner. So we've had examples of Danish where there is a government negotiation. That's the only way at the moment of going around this export controls. But then it ends up governments choosing a company de facto that can jump through this hoop. And I think that's also disadvantages some of the more innovative companies, because the larger companies that are multinational, sort of now multinationals, right? The Ukrainian defense industry ranges from multinationals to, and we don't think about it, we know Rheinmetall, but there are also multinationals in Ukraine, right? To a person in the garage with the whole production, right? So then you basically disadvantage the innovation, because the big company that has Pompeo as one of the advisors on the board, they can, go government to government and go through the regulations, while then the more smaller innovative, they find difficulties. And I think that's something on the export controls. What we've seen, indeed, Zelensky seems to, and people around him seem to be changing the thinking about it. I don't think it's a done deal yet, because it's sort of administrative procedure, right? It's not a law that you need to repeal. It's administrative procedure. It would be wonderful to simplify those administrative procedures. And as Katerina was saying, that have a white list of countries, government-to-government negotiations, again, like the Danes have done. This is the simplified list with this country. Or maybe pre-approving certain companies. You have a sort of white list criteria.
Can I just clarify one thing? I'm confused. I thought the Danish deal is about getting the Ukrainians to procure specific weapon systems for themselves. So how does this relate to export control? That stuff is never exported, right?
This is one of the deals, and I'm sure here people will comment on it more in questions, but there is also a deal where the Danish to Ukrainian government makes it easier for some of the companies to work in Denmark, or Ukrainian companies to work in Denmark.
Got it.
And also, continue on this export controls, it leaves companies sort of desperate. And as Katerina described, in some cases, we worry about sort of IP, know-how, the special skills. But when some companies, what they do, they send their people to work in European country with a company. So they don't have then the legal protection really of keeping their IP, but at the same time, because they're so desperate to have cooperation with that European company, they send up their people, and they're trying to sit on the knife edge of the legality of the current export controls, and of course they're also exposed this way, right? So, and then other companies fully incorporate themselves in Europe. That's also not something that we want. We want these companies to continue working in Ukraine as well. So this is on the first one. On the second one, the Russia, or the second one was the...
The second one was... maybe do a very quick one on the Russian, because the really big question is, where is the binding constraint? I mean, what should we prioritize?
Exactly. So the quick one on Russia is that Russia used to be a massive arms exporter. Actually, if you look carefully, and there is such a thing that's called Eurasians, it's European, whatever they call it in English, it's sort of the Russian version of European Union, where Ukraine used to sort of be dragged into before the promise of the close integration was Europe. I'm looking at various people here who were responsible for that close integration was Europe. And if you look at the documents, and we've actually invested a lot of time on that, if you look at the documents, in the very, very end of those documents of how wonderful it is that Ukraine should join this union, is actually grievance that Ukraine used to produce a lot of components and weapons for Russian military-industrial complex. And that's really the true pain point, because you go through the whole massive kind of annual report and various documents why sort of this union is so wonderful for Russia. And if you break break them down, Russia, it is wonderful for Russia, not for Ukraine. It break it down point by point. It's really burdened the appendix. And by the way, they produce these things for us and we really want them. So that's really what it is. So Russia used to export to, especially hardware, old-fashioned hardware, to India and China, because they have such demands in the front line at the moment. Everything has dropped, and that is actually very good news, because Russian companies are these big industrial conglomerates, like almost the chaebols in the worst version of them, that have over the years eaten up all the small companies, and they get recapitalized regularly because they're not profitable. The only place where they are more profitable is export contracts, and I think that's where it's very important to make it so difficult for them to do this export and I think the first and the easiest is to make sure that they don't have the capacity to produce, that they're still, that we are supporting Ukraine enough, that Russians don't have spare to go and export and market. But this is definitely a very, very, very important area, because it gives profitability to Russian companies which are otherwise not profitable. And of course, there is a story of corruption and inefficiency and other issues. And then in terms of the other areas apart from export controls, it's an important binding constraint. We hope to make these arguments and keep moving Ukrainian administration forward to sort of gradually loosen them up through the whitelisting of company, whitelisting of countries. But in addition to that, you need to do a lot of education, especially for small and medium enterprises in Ukraine. And I think Katerina's association does that a lot, and industry associations. Maybe it's not always Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Defense who needs to do it, in terms of how to prepare the financial statements, how to have legal rights in terms of your IP, in terms of your know-how. We need to, with the EU accession, it's very helpful. We can synchronize the IP regulation in the EU with the IP regulation in Ukraine. So the more we synchronize and educate the companies, that it will make it easier, and also maybe they will be more open, because they will know that their legal rights are protected if they're going out to European market. And then finally, of course, we'll talk about anti-corruption measures. Yes, just like in any other countries, there are other anti-corruption measures that need to take place to make sure that that the transparency that NABO and others have started, it continues. But again, having a more transparent, simplified process is also a way of quote-unquote fighting corruption, rather than this obscure list of administrative measures that nobody's clear why a certain company can jump through and other not.
Great. I think we'll come back a little later on, what... there are obviously other parts that you could think of, other components of an industrial policy on the financing side, for example, on what Europe can do and so forth, which you probably will want to discuss. But let's leave this for the second round. So let me turn to Lukas. So obviously you're here as the token commission person. So sorry about that, but it's a good thing, because we need that perspective on this panel. So I would ask you the following. We have now a pretty massive, not maybe as massive as we've hoped, but still pretty massive loan/conditional transfer for Ukraine, which is the 90 billion, of which about 2/3 is supposed to support arms production and the defense sector more broadly. So the question to you is, do we have, in a way, the institutional framework and the policies lined up to make sure that this money is spent as effectively as possible from the perspective of the EU, if you like, because this is, the perspective of the EU and maybe close to that of Ukraine, because our common interest is for Ukraine to win this war, but it goes broader than that, and so there are a few things I can think of. So one is this issue that maybe you want some conditionality to make sure that Ukraine's domestic policies are aligned with the interests of its arms industry, or rather the development interests of Ukraine. So this would be quite analogous to the reasons why conditionality is applied, for example, by the International Monetary Fund, except that it would be sectoral. Another aspect which you maybe want to react to is this idea that Katerina put out, that we should be doing more to replace Chinese components by EU in the Ukrainian value chains. So as a hard-knuckled economist, I'm not completely convinced that this is a good idea, because if this stuff is a lot cheaper, and the prerogative is to win this war as cheaply as possible, should we really insist on that? But it's just a question for you. So should there be an element of EU industrial policy in there? And then the final point is, I'm pretty sure that the ability, and that's a point that was made by two of the panelists in the first one, that the ability of Ukraine to procure as much as cheaply as possible also depends on the organization of our own military and industrial sector, and particularly on competition in Europe, on common procurement structures, which we would ideally make Ukraine a part of. And so now we have, in effect, an enormous amount of money that could spur maybe structural changes to make these improvements. And, they are perhaps even more urgent when linked to the Ukrainian war effort than they would be anyway, right? Because we are here like, oh yeah, Putin is a big threat, but hopefully he's not going to arrive in the next 4 or 5 years. So in the meantime, we can just continue doing our bloody, defense nationalism in France, Germany, and whatever other countries. But here, there's a war to be won or lost. So can this give us an additional incentive? And I'm going to personally make sure you're not fired after answering all these questions.
Thanks, Jeremy. You already gave a very good outline of an answer, right? But so last year there was this wonderful idea floated by several think tanks in different shapes, but it basically boiled down to, why don't we establish an international defense procurement agency? Just like in 1951, the European Coal and Steel Community was created in order to address a very, very pertinent function back then. Today, for Europe's defense, the European Coalition of the Willing and Ukraine would ideally set up a common defense procurement agency in order to properly discuss and organize what items should be procured for the defense of Ukraine, and by application for strengthening the shield of Europe that Ukraine effectively represents. So, like many good ideas in European integration, in Brussels they are usually takes years before they are properly taken up in Brussels. I don't think that this idea came too early. We are entering year 5 of the full-scale invasion, and I very much share the consternation that, how many shocks does Europe really need in order to be shocked into commensurate action and response? But that's where we are. So since 2022, of course, there has been a lot of incremental stepping up on the side of the EU in terms of spending on defense, supporting Ukraine's defense, putting in place the organizational institutional arrangements. And now, with the upcoming 60 billion, de facto, the EU and its member states, together with Ukraine, will need to again invent some kind of mechanism of not only oversight, but even of planning and kind of jointly deciding on what should be procured. Right? So there was political reluctance to give it a proper framing, and to create a new international organization that would also involve Ukraine as an equal member. Well, de facto, in order to properly spend the 60 billion that will be borrowed by the EU and provided to Ukraine, in order to collectively decide how to effectively spend it, such a decision-making mechanism will have to be established, and it will be de facto established in over the coming weeks. There will be a dialogue. Ukraine, being the best place to actually propose what needs to be bought, will make a proposal, right? So a Ukrainian financing strategy is being prepared, and will then be discussed with the EU 27 and their institutions. So it will somehow happen. Probably it could have happened in a better framed, more institutional way, but this is kind of the logic of the incremental response. Now, if I can
So, sorry, can you just elaborate on that? That was amazing. You're saying we will get proper procurement coordination in Europe as a result of this in the next few weeks?
Well,
And what do you mean by Ukraine knows best? So Ukraine will essentially identify what technology Europe needs to fight the Russians, and that other procurement agencies will understand this, and there will be then joint procurement for those technologies?
To what extent there will be joint procurement, or to what extent just Ukrainian procurement? All that will be discussed over the next weeks. But the basic concept is that Ukraine will be invited to come with a proposal on how to actually use the 60 billion. By the way, it will be similar also for the civilian 30 billion. I mean, also there will be some proposal from the Ukrainian side, and that's how it should be, right? Because Ukraine ultimately is the user of the money. So Ukraine will come with a proposal on what it needs, and then that proposal will be discussed, I'm sure, pretty thoroughly with the institutions of the EU 27.
Okay, continue. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, I just wanted to point out that, of course, so there is this very important 60 billion window under the upcoming Ukraine support loan. At the same time, indeed, already there is the SAFE instrument, so the 150 billion capacity that the EU 27 created for itself in order to invest in its defense, partly with Ukraine, partly procuring from Ukraine, but kind of optionally, right? So these are, I think, the two biggest instruments that have been put in place, financially the biggest. And then we have some kind of smaller complementary instruments. One is the European Defense Industrial Program. We also have, under the Ukraine facility that we put in place in 2024, we have the so-called Ukraine Investment Framework. That's where we work with development banks, effectively, with EIB, that was mentioned earlier, but also with national development finance institutions. There we work on financing investments, and we are now opening up this Ukraine investment framework also to possible investments in scaling up production of dual-use goods. So drones, precision machinery, communication systems, navigation, you name it. The dual-use sector is very diverse and broad. So there we are basically trying to see which development banks, and I count there also the EIB, are motivated and able to adapt and to broaden the scope of their activities also in not just to continue financing municipal repairs and water infrastructure and renewable energy and all the good things that need to be financed, but also to finance small, medium-sized, or even larger enterprises active in producing dual-use goods. And it's really an effort that takes a lot of adaptation from all sides. So for the Commission, it's something new. For the development finance institutions, is something new, and not all of them are comfortable with this area of activity. So the EIB that was mentioned in the first panel is currently pondering and reflecting on whether it should make this kind of next step, because it did make some steps into financing the defense sector in the EU 27, but it's not sure whether it would make the next step towards financing also Ukraine's defense sector. There's an intensive debate going on there. There are some partners, for example, I'm saying no secrets here, for example, the Polish Development Bank, BGK, which is, I think, more open towards being active in this area. We have now good new proposals from a Finnish financial institution or from a French financial institution. In some cases, these are the export credit agencies, kind of also focused on promoting their industries. But that's good, right? So we have some, in a kind of bottom-up way, there are some initiatives. Let's face it, we are speaking here about tens of millions of euros or low hundreds of millions of euros of this is the size of the investment programs that we are speaking about here. But it's good that some European banks are interested with financial backing of the EU, so with EU guarantees in this case, to also invest in stepping up Ukraine's production capacity in the dual-use sector. Now, because we are speaking about resources of the EU budget, there is still an exclusion on that we would not be able to use this for financing weapons and ammunition. But there is many other things, for example, the drones that could be financed in this way. So that's about kind of trying to step up production. Obviously, the question of the offtake, of the procurement, and what is bought and how the procurement is prioritized, that question is then on the other side.
Okay.
So just to wrap it up, there are a number of instruments, as usual, on the EU side that are trying to kind of address different parts of the problematic.
Okay, very good. Okay, just to explain the plan, I'm going to give particularly our three panelists here a chance to react and maybe also to react to each other, and then I will open up. So I guess to the three black-clad women on my left, can you maybe react to what Lucas said? So is this roughly in line with what you think the Commission should be doing, number one? Second, it would be great if you reacted to Heidi's point at the end of the last panel, where she basically argued that the private financial sector can and should play an important role. I mean, she had expressed a certain amount of optimism that this is happening anyway because of close connections of Ukraine's tech and diaspora to VC in the US. And of course, we have examples from other countries, including Israel, for example, where you very naturally get these connections to develop. And so the question there is, beyond being happy about this, is there a role for the public sector in spurring this, beyond simply providing stable procurement demand, right? I mean, the economist in me thinks, you know, if companies have a pipeline and a business plan, they are going to get the access to finance, okay? We don't need to do anything else. But maybe there's something that needs to be done, and particularly in this context, the role of development banks, right? So the EBRD has already tried a lot in terms of, de-risking investment, not specifically in the defense sector, but broadly. I think the EIB probably has something similar, and the EIB, of course, can do not just dual use, but any non-lethal weapons funding at this point. Are they doing what they should be doing, or should they go beyond? So these are just some random questions thrown at the three of you. Why don't we go in the same order as before, please? Start, Sinika.
Thank you. Maybe I'll talk about the private sector, private financial sector. I think eventually they would have to come in. The Ukrainian financial sector, I think, well, know the level of the interest rates there. That there is some preferential loan programs, but I've understood that the financial sector is as such is not doing its job. It's quite a small sector. It has always been quite small. So I think for Ukrainian companies, I know one case of a joint venture with a Finnish drone manufacturer and a Ukrainian one, and they are. Then you can have better funding opportunities if you have this joint venture, and you can access the Finnish financial markets, the EU financial markets, to this joint venture. So unfortunately, that's the situation. But I think that's one way for Ukrainian companies to go forward. But before that. Before the private sector kind of steps up, and the situation, the macroeconomic situation in Ukraine would be more stable. They could lower the key interest rate. The national bank could lower its key interest rate now because there's so much uncertainty all the time. The national bank really has to keep its hand stable and a fairly keep a high interest rate at the same time. So hopefully that will materialize in the future. Before that, I think like these export promotion agencies and I'm sorry to say that these government-led initiatives will have a role and need to have a role, But I think they have to, like with all subsidies, government subsidies, they have to have an exit strategy. They cannot make themselves indispensable and make all the actors dependent on themselves, so that there will be kind of organic business happening at the same time.
Can I just clarify that you're saying that official money needs to have a role beyond simply buying garbs and garbs of arms from Ukrainian manufacturers? You think there is actually a case for using public money in the EU for something else?
Well, now mostly talking about the guarantees loans or things like that, but
so there is a financial friction that requires public money, even if we offer stable demand for the products themselves. And if so, is this something that can be taken care of by the existing international financial institutions, particularly the EIB and the EBRD, or does it require an additional instrument?
I think so. And I've understood that the situation is similar in Sweden. The money is there, but companies, joint ventures have not materialized yet. So there's something there that I, as a central banker, I have to say I don't know.
Okay, very good. Katarina, go ahead.
Yeah, from my perspective, like money is the smallest issue in this reality, actually. Unfortunately, Ukraine inside the war, we are post-Soviet state, economy is not so stable, so that we have this issue with budget and procuring. But in terms of like European issue, I guess the biggest problem is actually the narrative and the way to see the reality. And I personally see the biggest role of European Commission or European institution is actually to shape the narrative inside your society, because the question is whether each member state ready for drone threat from the Russia side. Because drone, it's not like one simple item, it's a huge industry with different military capacities. So if we're talking about Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia, it's important to teach the military to use FPV drones and deep strike drones. If we're talking about France, Germany, it's another type of drone capacities. You should prevent different type of threats which could be inside civilian cities and could be used as terroristic attacks. So we in Ukraine experience this drama, and I personally live in Kiev, and it's not so easy thing for mentality of your society actually to experience drone attacks each night. It's a terror. And my concern is actually that I don't feel that European society is fully aware of the potential drone threat, and we already experienced like different drone attacks in 10 European member states. And what is the reaction? Nothing. It means that Russia tested this theory and it worked for them. And what was the political answer to that? And it's the biggest issue, because we in Ukraine, we don't feel the meaning of Article 5, because drones are already there, and unfortunately we are not ready. So I guess it's important to see war in Ukraine not only as Ukrainian issue anymore. It's a common issue for the whole region, and it doesn't seem for me that the reaction is fair enough from our common side.
But just very specifically, can you make the link between what would have been a proper reaction to these drone threats and what the Ukrainian companies that you represent can do, right? Because this is, other than acquiring our own drones and sending them to Moscow in large quantities, which would clearly not have been a plausible answer for what they did at Brussels airport and so forth. So is there a defensive technology that we should be waking up to?
Yeah, the first thesis is actually we should see drone industry as a whole ecosystem. So each member state in the European Union should be aware how to react. For example, let's take Lithuania. Who is responsible of hitting enemy drones in Vilnius? Is it police? Is it military? Who is that? In Ukraine, we have a whole ecosystem how to react to Shahid drones. once I came to Kiev, after this, we have a restriction. You could not go to the street after 12 o'clock in the night because wartime rule. And I had a permission to go there, and I saw this police in Kiev with guns actually to shoot shaheeds. So it's a whole ecosystem with special missiles like Patriots from our partners to hit the biggest rockets. Actually, police could use guns to hit shaheeds, etc. So it's whole ecosystem how to react on that. So each member state should be aware how to react when shaheed drone is flying under your city. Another thing, it's important to calculate production capacities inside the European Union. So in Ukraine, we could produce around 10 million of drones per year, different types. So what is the production capacities of drones inside Europe? Because unfortunately, Ukraine could be limited for many reasons, with export, with Russia attacks, with electricity threat, etc. So what is the production capacities of each countries, and like whether these countries could procure enough drones to train their military, and what is the size of the army in each state which has the border with Russia, and whether this military trained to use drones, and whether this country understand what type of drones do they need. Again, if it's Estonia, it could be land system. If it's Germany, it's another type of anti-drone solutions.
Okay, got it. Alina, please.
Thank you. I will continue with exactly sort of zooming out a little bit on the political constraints, right? So what Ukraine would ideally like to have is that everybody comes, produces there, Ukraine can use it, benefits from it, keeps its IP and know-how. What Europeans would like to do is to learn everything from Ukraine and produce domestically, because each politician wants to show, oh, look, I built a factory here. So for the help to Ukraine, I got something in return. So I think the way we square that circle, and what I was talking earlier, is a joint venture production, most likely, where both sides can benefit. And for that to happen, we already talked about export controls, about synchronizing the regulation. For that to happen, we need to go through these big steps from both sides, from Ukrainian side and also from the European side. If that were to happen, of course, there is always a role for the EIB and other institutions, especially in the early stages. But if you do have a joint venture company, you do have access to the European financial market, and you also have a good understanding of the reality on the ground in Ukraine. So I think it's good that we're thinking of multiple issues at the same time, but we also need to take away the big issues. And I'm here probably also as an economist with you, is that export controls, stable procurement, and then a lot of other things will start falling into place. We're not going to solve these two big issues with export agencies that will provide some financing. That's not realistic. In terms of the spare capacity in Ukraine, Kyiv School of Economics estimated in 2024 that it's $25 billion. That's potentially the spare capacity. We haven't done the update recently. Ukraine's GDP in 2024 was 190 billion. So that is potentially a huge spare capacity, and of course would make production in Ukraine much cheaper. I think that's, I think I'll stop here so that you also have an opportunity to say something.
Any reactions? You don't need to react.
Sorry, no, financing. I
Yes,
forgot
financing.
my favorite chicken farm. Ukrainian markets are open again, the international capital markets, talking about the financing. It's about $500 million bond issuance, 3 times oversubscribed, and I think the final borrowing rate was about 10%. So I think also Ukrainians have to be more gentle on their domestic financial stability. Let's think from our IMF experience, which country under the full-scale war has maintained this degree of financial stability, macro-financial stability, and also economic data processing, analysis, and research? I cannot think of any.
Lucas, any reactions?
I definitely agree that it's the predictable outlook for stable procurements, kind of stable offtake. That is the main driving force then for the industry. There can be these auxiliary measures that we are trying to take with EIB or with national development finance institutions to foster partnerships. So, for example, between Finnish companies and Ukrainian companies, with financing from Finvera that would be backed by an EU guarantee. This is nice, and let's try to have it with as many EU member states as possible to foster these partnerships. But the scale will really come only from the offtake from the Ukrainian armed forces and EU 27 armed forces.
Right.
And I suppose that the reality will force governments in order to allocate the necessary resources for that offtake year after year. So for the moment, after the December summit, which was tense in Brussels, there was this agreement on the 90 billion Ukraine support loan. When we look, then this will probably be sufficient for 2026 and a bit of 2027. Probably will not cover even the whole of 2027, right? And then will come the next multi-annual financial framework. So there is an initial proposal from the Commission for 100 billion of financing from the EU for Ukraine for the whole 7 years. Maybe the evolving situation will then lead to a reassessment of the figures when the time comes, right? But I suppose the evolving reality will actually force all of us collectively and the EU member states to allocate the necessary resources to the defense. Because the Russian threat will obviously not go away, right? It has been, the Russians have been showing quite clearly over the last 20 years what they are interested in doing. Whoever wants to see clearly the outlook sees it. So we will end up having to allocate the necessary resources. But of course, it would be great if we put in place the mechanisms that would make it possible to use the financial resources increasingly efficiently. The point was also very well made from the audience in the first panel that to have permanently 30% cost inefficiency just because of fragmentation and lack of coordination, that's not great if at the scale that we are talking about.
Right. Thank you so much. By the way, I do hope the Russian threat will go away at some point, but it will require real deep political change in Russia. Okay, so you will probably have thought that I'm extremely relaxed about the time, and the reason why I'm so relaxed about the time is because probably because my team anticipated that I would run over. They have allocated 30 minutes to me for some concluding remarks, which I haven't even thought of. Okay, so I will not take more than 5 minutes for those concluding remarks, which means we have plenty of time now for discussion. So I invite your comments, and they, as in the first session, they can also be put in on Slido with the code being #UkraineDefense, capital U in one word, #UkraineDefense. Any takers? Heidi, I was hoping you would come back. Yes, please go ahead. So this is Heidi Kribo-Rediker from the Council on Foreign Relations.
Thank you very much, German. Thank you. This was an amazing second panel. I'm so impressed. I want to go back and think optimistically about the future post-war Ukrainian economy and back to that original slide and posit that this is not a traditional defense conversion situation on the other side of this. When I think back to the time I spent on Guns to Butter, like post-Soviet defense conversion, we didn't see, all of the Russian military-industrial complex able to produce a refrigerator. We're talking about, and Katarina mentioned this, an ecosystem. You have an ecosystem that is the most advanced in robotics, in the communication between different autonomous vehicles. You have not only the drones, but you have them in many, many shapes, sizes that are all dual use. They are dual use in the future technology and the future technology economy. So when I think about that line of the military industrial complex and the manufacturing base and the flatlining of Ukrainian manufacturing, on the other side of this, is there not a case to be made that we can't use the same assumptions on what the future of a dual use on the other way around when you're going to have one of the most innovative economies on the planet?
Any other questions or comments? Please, Jacob. Jacob Kierkegaard, Bruegel, and PIE.
Thank you. So the EU today signed a free trade agreement, historic in itself, with India, probably one of the most closed economies in the world. But India is also the largest arms importer in the world, and actually one of Russia's main export markets. So my question to maybe Martina and Sinica in particular, if we assume that the, if you like, military industrialization of the Ukrainian economy is not reversible for the foreseeable future, isn't it still the case that Ukraine, and especially a Ukrainian defense industry that is more integrated with that, with the EU, which is the vision of the Commission in its implementing of the 90 billion euro loan, is potentially, you know, there's quite a lot of upside there, if I might put it that way. Thank you.
Very good. Do we have a third comment or question? Otherwise, I will give back. Anyone would like to take a crack at these? Elina, do you want to start, maybe?
I was just taking a note to myself. I forgot to mention dual use. So I think we're definitely on the same page, because Ukrainian economy and the companies involved, many of them also come from the civilian sector. It's not that you only old legacy companies that sort of went into this. In Russia, it's still mostly old legacy companies, although some small sort of private funded companies are also beginning to emerge. So that gives a unique opportunity for Ukraine to be able to think both ways, and also think how to convert back to their normal life, which is actually civilian IT innovation. And that takes us further on that scale for European Union. When we read all the Draghi and all other reports, you know, we have the luxury of developing our military-industrial base defense in a way that is conducive to our productivity, with AI, with the new data, and Katerina, you know, I'm sure can talk much more about that, you know, how to design sort of the cost of data, the use of data, the transfer of data for the military industrial capacity that can also go to the productivity enhancements in Europe. So I think that is critical, and that also gives an opening for financing institutions or other non-government institutions that normally wouldn't be touching defense to be able to make a difference. So if they're more focused on dual-use goods, then they can enter this space as well, which gives more sort of room for maneuver.
Go ahead.
There is one thing that scares me, actually, about dual use. Sometimes I see like dual use as an excuse not to react to military threat. So some institutions, they use dual use as this like safe path actually to somehow support defense technologies, but not calling it defense, because we don't want to be associated with military threat. And sometimes huge international security forums, they could not provide this opportunity to export drones because it's like tricky for them to be associated with arms. So I guess it's important to invest resources and money into dual-use technologies in the sectors where it's important, but at the same time it's also important to open our eyes and to be ready into investing money within this defense tech ecosystem, to be open to export drones and to call like black, white, because to use this dual-use trick somehow to hide that we want to support like drone industry, it's so risky for the security of European Union.
Can I just jump in and add? I think if we're calling black and white, is that in Europe we often call things that are potential actual defense threats hybrid threats. So a drone over my house or over the airport, is it a hybrid threat or it's actually close to actual defense threat? And I understand why this happens because of the various military doctrines that haven't been updated, but all the same, if my plane is shot down over Brussels airport by a drone, you know, it's a very kinetic threat to me as a citizen. And I think that goes together with this education that we need to digest as fast as we can, how to update these processes and systems to reflect the new threats, and stop calling it hybrid threat.
Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I would just jump into what Elina just said. Yeah, you all read about this cables being cut over the Gulf of Finland. several times. It's been a Christmas tradition almost for us. And how to react to these, and what is the to find real proof of this kind of hybrid acts in a courtroom. That's what we're facing now. You probably, some of you have followed this, and that is one of the things we have to kind of, how to protect this critical infrastructure. There's like direct electricity lines going there as well between Finland and Estonia. So these are one of the examples there. And maybe on India a little bit. I guess nobody believed that it was coming. I think it was over 2 decades that in the coming this. But I think in the end it's a good sign, and I think if Ukraine and when Ukraine will join the European Union, we will have like somebody mentioned already in the previous panel, that we will have a very strong military base, one of the most experienced armies, and I think that would be a big opportunity for us. Just an example from Finnish companies, we are a fairly new NATO member, and we have had our own military industrial companies that were kind of, let's say, eternal potential successes for a very long time. And everybody was like, why are the Germans buying our armor vehicles and things like that? But then NATO accession happened, and before that we've been working on these regulatory frameworks as well. And now the Ukraine is working on this as well, because military procurement is not a normal business in a say. You need to have the procedures and the regulations have to be there. And as long as Ukraine is working on this, I think the business will come as well, because you have the cost benefit and the experience and everything. So these kind of boring administrative things are quite important. And the Finnish business, only now that we are kind of NATO compatible in the full scale, the eternal potential started to arise a little bit as well.
Great. Any final questions? Otherwise, I will now expose you to my closing remarks, but I guarantee it will be brief. Anyone online? Okay, so you get to lunch early, even though I went over time. So I'm going to maybe summarize it in 5 or 6 points. So the first point on motivation and relevance is that I think, according to this panel at least, there's absolutely no ambiguity that the development of the Ukrainian defense industrial base is going to be good for Ukraine, not just in helping it win the war, but for economic development more broadly. And I think this view is probably supported by the fact that, to the extent that there are successful industrial policy experiments in history that typically have to do with defense demand, right? This is how Silicon Valley got off the ground. And there's the Israeli examples, of course, and so there is, I think, a good basis for assuming that defense will not crowd out other areas of comparative strength in Ukraine, like ICT particularly, which would have been the main area had this war not happened, but can in fact spur it. Okay, the second point is that the Ukraine development and integrating the Ukraine defense sector is also essential for the EU. And so I've effectively learned 2 points from the discussion that go beyond the generic point that, you know, Ukraine has learned how to produce very large quantities of cutting-edge arms at very low cost, and so we need those because Putin will be next to invade here. I mean, that the obvious argument is there, but I think there are two more. The first one that sort of Katarina emphasized is that this is something that applies even in the very short term, right? Because the threats are already here, and there's something to be learned from how Ukraine has been even defensively reacting to this threat, and we need both their know-how and their technology for that. And then there was the point sort of made by Jacob at the end and Doris here, which is we are a continent or union that is basically looking for new exports markets for industrial goods. I mean, we're losing them. And so, you know, coincidentally, we just came up with an FTA with India that needs lots of arms. So what could be nicer than the idea of displacing Russia as the main exporter of arms to India, thereby spurring EU exports, which will, in the future, of course, include Ukraine with broader value chain implications across Europe. So it's not just something that's localized in Ukraine. Okay, the third point I would say is that, you know, the holy grail is stability of procurement demand, and so we will need that both by putting money on the table and by building an institutional structure around it that lowers risk for companies that are seeking funding to invest in order to satisfy that procurement demand. The fourth point is that this is not everything. So there are clearly domestic constraints within Ukraine that have to be addressed. This has to do with export barriers that might still exist. It has to do with institutional capacity in Ukraine to access the defense market, something that clearly development banks can help with, but also industry associations like the one that's headed by Katarina can help with. And then finally, there's probably a role for private financial instruments beyond simply procurement demand. And a question which we do not, I think, conclusively address is whether the current institutional structure is set up sufficiently to do that through EBRD and EIB in particular, or whether we need something more. Fifth, and the most important for me, is the need and the desirability of using you know, the war in Ukraine as a catalyst to transform our own structures here in the EU. And so the link, of course, is partly through this need to make things stable and cheap for Ukraine, but the main point is that we can use the Ukraine crisis to help ourselves, not just in this direct way of getting Ukraine to be very good at producing cheap goods and buying them, but also to create the industrial structure and the procurement structure that both benefits Ukraine and ultimately ourselves, but which may be resisted internally. And so the key idea is here competition. So let's use those new entrants from Ukraine to shake up our own industries, but if we're going to do that, we need to create the rules that actually enable those companies to effectively compete in the EU, and those rules do not exist right now because, as you know, single market rules are do not apply for matters of national security, and then the point that Lukas made about procurement structure. So that it's really a great opportunity, and then the final issue, well, how do we deal with the political constraints, right? So the joint venture idea may be one, but I mean the main issue I think will have to be that unlike the generic sense of being abandoned by the US and having put in our doorsteps, we face a deadline here, which is, you know, this money is only going to last for a year and a half. Do we continuously want to continue funding it? So let's make the institutional changes now that we need for this problem to go away as soon as possible. So maybe if Greenland didn't concentrate our minds, I sure hope that Ukraine will concentrate our minds. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, and I'm releasing you for lunch a little early.